Good morning, and welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart, Indiana. My name is Patricia Riley Chirilla. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I participate in the life of the church by being the chair of the worship committee and leading the pagan holy day rituals. I have an announcement here. You might wonder what's going on in the building while we're not doing in-person services. Well, you will see it soon. We're hoping to reopen for in-person services in 4 to 6 weeks. But in the meantime, imagine a new, fresh look for the parish hall and the offices, and keep in mind the wonderful people who are contributing to the metamorphosis, chief among them James and Tracy and Roz. We are currently in search for a full-time minister. When we do not have a minister in the pulpit, we invite members or guests to share a special message with us. Today, our worship service will be led by Reverend Marie Beth Siroki. We are currently streaming our services online. During this time of responsible social distancing, we are striving to maintain the authenticity of our services. So allow me to draw your attention to several parts of our service today. The bell you heard ringing was our actual church bell. If you are willing and able, we invite you to leave your video cameras on so that your fellow congregants can see you just as they would if you were physically present. There will be a time in the service when you will all be briefly unmuted to say good morning to one another. If you are participating with us on Zoom, the Joys and Concerns segment of the service will remain private. The service will be recorded and will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Let your Facebook and Twitter friends know that you are attending worship with hashtag First Unitarian Hobart. Please take a deep breath now and join us in a spirit of reverence. Today's opening words are by Terrell Anderson, author and creator of the Unapologetically Noir exhibit. What does it mean to be Black? When I look at the country that assigned me this color for representation, it just reminds me of our past, a past that many want to overlook or forget it ever happened. What were my ancestors before they were rebranded Black? I will never know.
Please join me now in the lighting of the chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, and gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in the celebration of a life we share together. Maybe.
Not enough wick?
Not enough wick. Now there is.
Join me, please, in our opening hymn, number 169, We Shall Overcome. Join me now, please, in the affirmation of faith. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Welcome to everyone who is joining us virtually today. Everyone will be unmuted for a short time so that you may greet each other. Over here.
Hello.
This congregation expresses our greatest joys and deepest sorrows in community. We believe that a joy shared is magnified and a sorrow shared is diminished. We pause listening to what arises from within our hearts. If you are joining us on Zoom, your joys and sorrows will not be streamed online. Please type your joys and concerns into the chat box while we listen to Jeremy's music. We lift up these joys and sorrows and hold them in our hearts, including those too tender to share aloud. And now, the story for the child in each of us.
Thank you. Today's story is Brave Charlotte by Anu Stoner and Heinrich Wilson. Nobody knew why Charlotte was different from all the other sheep, but she had been different right from the start. When all the other lambs just stood shyly by their mothers, Charlotte was leaping around ready for an adventure. Jack, the old sheepdog, tried to keep Charlotte in line, but she wasn't scared of him. One day, Charlotte was missing. The shepherd found her up a tree. Jack tried to chase her down, but Charlotte wanted to stay up there a little longer and moved only when she was ready. Said the old sheep, shaking their heads disapprovingly. Where is this going to end? But that was just the beginning. Another time, Charlotte jumped over the side of a riverbank and went for a swim in the fast-running stream. Said the older sheep, shaking their heads. Before long, Charlotte was up to more mischief. She had climbed to the very top of the highest peak, something no sheep have ever done before. Uh-oh, groaned the other sheep. They were hardly able to watch because it had made them feel dizzy. When they found Charlotte on the side of a dangerously busy road, staring at the oncoming traffic, all the sheep wanted to know what she was doing. But Charlotte didn't want to tell them. Oh my goodness, explained the old sheep. What is she up to? What would they say if they knew that at night Charlotte secretly roamed through the countryside? When all the others were sleeping, she would quietly slip away to her special place and gaze at the moon. Even Jack didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but he didn't have very good ears those days. When in autumn, as the days grew shorter and the nights darker, something terrible happened. The sheep fell over and broke his leg. The shepherd fell over and broke his leg. Jack barked and circled around him, but that didn't help one bit. The shepherd lay on the grass, not knowing what to do. Oh dear, said the older sheep. Somebody must go to the farmer's house in the valley and get help. Jack should go. He is the only one who knows the way, but it's too far. He hardly even manages with the sheep these days. Yes, that's true, said the others, shaking their heads in despair. When Charlotte says, I'll do it, I'll go. Charlotte? Muttered the other sheep. The little rascal, out of the question. The sheep had never gone to the valley alone. Absolutely not. The oldest sheep were beside themselves with worry, but Charlotte could no longer hear them. She had already reached the big oak tree and was trying to find a way to the valley. She bounded over fields, through fast-running streams, and over the mountain tops until it got dark. When Charlotte reached the busy bus, it was the middle of the night. She stood at the side of the road and watched the oncoming traffic. The lights of the cars shone, so did Charlotte's eyes. The truck driver noticed Charlotte's shining eyes and stopped on the road. Going to the valley, he asked kindly. Charlotte nodded. It was so nice to roam through the night in the truck that Charlotte was almost sorry to have to get out. Take care, said the friendly truck driver. You too, thought Charlotte. The farmer was asleep when Charlotte tapped on the window pane with her nose. A sheep, said the farmer's wife. Who woke up first? It's Charlotte, said the farmer. She is all alone. Something must be up. Charlotte and the farmer drove on the tractor to find the other sheep. When they arrived, the poor shepherd was still lying in the grass. The farmer took him to the hospital without delay. The shepherd had his leg in a cast for 3 weeks before he was able to go back to the sheep. He's not a youngster anymore, said the older sheep, just like Jack. What will happen to us, they wondered. As long as Charlotte is here to watch over us, we should be okay. That's very true, said the older sheep. They continued to chatter and shake their heads. And Charlotte? At that moment, she was taking Jack to her special place. Where's the introduction?
And now the service will be brought to you by Reverend Marie Beth Siroki, What I Learned About Being Black and Brave.
Good morning. How is that they say, who needs no introduction? I am Reverend Marie Beth Siroki, and I'm really grateful to be asked to deliver this message today during Black History Month. For those of you who are listening and not viewing this, I need to say right up front that I'm not black, and I identify as white, which is why I chose the title, What I Learned About Being Black and Brave. And it's truly a work in progress. The message is focused on my experiences of growing up in Gary, Indiana, and during the 60s and the 70s, a time, if you will, of a lot of civil unrest, a lot of civil rights movements, increasing injustice, inequity in housing, opportunities, education, just to name a few. But learning only comes after reflection. Learning only comes when you can engage in dialogue. Learning, like opportunity, only comes if you are willing. And I must admit, during the 60s and 70s, I don't know how willing I was to really learn what was behind everything. And probably as most teenagers year, I knew what was happening, I knew what was going on, but I wasn't willing to learn the whys and the hows behind it. But much is known and repeated about what happened to my hometown of Gary, Indiana. The white flight of businesses, organizations, churches, and families during the 60s, the loss of jobs and the loss of businesses. Now, this caused a massive shift in population, in numbers, and in race. Gary was racially divided not only according to population statistics, but in every aspect of society: our schools, our leaders, our neighborhoods, our economic factors, our employment. Nationwide now, people were moving to the suburbs, and shopping malls were becoming the norm. So the fact of moving out, the fact of, if you will, a white flight of moving, was not just regulated to Gary. This was happening nationwide. And our steel industry, of which U.S. Steel was the biggest employer, had begun to lay off employees. But this had not reached that critical point yet in my hometown. So I grew up firmly believing that the white flight was due to the increasing black population, that we had elected the first black mayor of a major city, and because of racism and because of people wanting to leave. Gary soon became the first major city in our state, Indiana, with the largest African American population. But enter that desire to know why. Now, growing up as a teenager, my mother would always say I could argue every point, which is true. But if I'm going to argue every point, I do want to know the truth. I do want to know, if you will, both sides of the story. I remember in seminary, I decided to study Hebrew for that reason. I wanted to know the original language of the First Testament. I wanted to know what we in the English translation always would hear from certain words. And I was amazed to find out in Hebrew, even taking a word like fear, there were so many different words in Hebrew for fear. They were only used at different times. So when we hear fear, we have our connotation of fear. But in the Hebrew language, there's sometimes in the Bible that word's only used in a certain place, in a certain event. And I found that fascinating. I wanted to understand these words because so much of our English translation we take as gospel, pun intended. And so I revisited that history of my city. Now, I believed in our democratic practice, and I trusted those representing our community. Yes, very naive, I know. But in other words, I still believe that inherent message that the abandonment of businesses would due to U.S. Steel and electing our first black mayor. To say I was shocked to learn that the main reason for the economic decline was actually the direct result of two of our elected representatives. Democratic Senator Benjamin representing Gary, and another representing Ross Township. In 1971, they introduced the Ross Township Buffer Zone Bill. Now, our state had a buffer zone bill that prohibited incorporation within 3 miles of a city. So I want to read from Gary Mayor Hatcher's recollection of that. Yeah, Indiana's got this constitution, which says you can't pass special laws for one city or one town. But they got around that, because instead of saying Gary, they said, we want to eliminate the buffer. Instead of saying we want to eliminate the buffer zone around Gary, they said, we want to eliminate the buffer zone around a city that has a river running through it, that has a steel mill, that has a population between dot to dot, and that's how they got around it. And by the time you got down to it, there was only one city that had that. Now, Mayor Hatcher went down and spoke with the governor, and he spoke with the representatives. And he explained to them that, first of all, it was unjust to eliminate Gary's buffer zone and leave all the other buffer zones around the state intact. Mayor Hatcher, I said it was discriminatory. And since Gary at that time was the city with the highest percentage of African American citizens, it would appear that you're discriminating against black people. I also tried to make the argument that even if whites' feelings of racism were so strong that they wanted to move out of Gary because it has a black mayor, even if that was true, they'd have no place to move unless they moved a long way away. And that could be very expensive. but instead they created this repository, and he calls it a repository of racism. He goes on to say how many talks he had with the governor on this. And what I learned recently about this statute, when I tried to look at it, it was one of the statutes that passed without a governor's signature. That doesn't happen very often. Usually when a bill is passed, there's so many days for the governor to sign it. This one passed without the governor's signature. But I also want to go back to some of the opportunities in Gary during that time that I didn't learn about. One of the most powerful, in 1972, now this was right after this happened with our laws, the Gary, Indiana held the National Black Political Convention, which became the largest political African American convention in the U.S. history. Over 10,000 attendees came to this. This is in 1972. Speakers included Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Bobby Seale. Part of the performers were Harry Belafonte, James Brown, Muhammad Ali was there, and of course, one of the first black mayors. But one of us has to accept opportunities to learn the meaning and truth. I did not know about this historical event in our city. And I still think many don't know about this. To think of how profound that was, to have all of these at that time, names of familiar names, the leaders of the movement, if you will, in our city at that time. And I did not know anything about it. It was more monumental once I learned about the discriminatory statute that happened in 71, that this happened in 72. That to me speaks to the determination that we're still going to have this, we're going to do this, we're still going to move. But it was only decades later that I learned even more, when I learned from those who had been there, those who were my age at the time. Reverend Dina Holland-Neal, as I call my ride or die partner, was a senior at Westside High School during this time. She tells in the book, The Gary Anthology, of her efforts, the canvassing, their attendance at the event. She also talks about her experiences with it. She talks about the high school students. She talks about her class and how they went door to door. She also mentions, as do others, that Gary didn't have any hotels at that time. Now we have 10,000 attendees coming. Many of them stayed at people's houses. People opened their homes to them. I didn't even think, well, first of all, I didn't realize there were 10,000 people, but I didn't even think. That's how committed they were to the community. That's how committed they were. To think of something like that happening now. Now again, I'm sure many of them, could have stayed in Chicago and probably did, et cetera, but that people opened their homes to them. Now, she also recounts in one of her experiences that she was being bused to a middle school in an all-white section of town. When Martin Luther King died, the administration didn't want to discuss or acknowledge the works of Martin Luther King. Now, along with a group of students, this is in middle school, they met with the administration. And they said, if they weren't allowed to acknowledge Martin Luther King, they would stage a walkout. And they did. Isn't that odd that they want to regulate what's being taught in school about race? Yeah. Sorry, this was back in, so. Now, I've held out some of the notable events and known individuals in their continued efforts. And going back to that, I look at the time of the 1971 statute, and that was his role as mayor. That was his role as mayor, to go down, even though your state representative from your city is putting forward this bill. So that was his role as mayor. But I also want to say, I can also consider it very brave. I consider it brave of him to do that. I would have no idea what it would be like to be an African American, one of the first mayors to a major city, having to go down to your governor, to your state, about a discriminatory law. Yes, it was his job. Yes, it was the mayor's job. But I will never know how that felt as a black man, to have to do that, to have to sit here and listen to that, to have to realize and representing your entire city, by the way, not just representing blacks, representing your entire city. So I think about the amount of bravery it takes, not just for those notables that I held up, but for everyday citizens, if you will, just to be themselves. I've learned so much from those whose achievements have been the first, have been unique, but I really haven't learned what it was like to get there. When I, as a white woman, hold up first of an African American, of a black person, I'm grateful for those who share their experiences to this point. I'm grateful for that, but I don't know what it was like. I can't make it personal of how it felt to get to that part. Case in point, I was very happy when my denomination, not happy, proud when my denomination, the United Church of Christ, ordained their first African American female in our Indiana-Kentucky conference. The path of ministry is long. The path of ministry in the last step requires you writing a paper and presenting a paper to an ecclesiastical council where you're being questioned on it and on what you wrote. Now that speaks of her courage in knowing her own self-worth, but I also want to say that I found out later, Reverend Sheena had to write her paper 13 times. 13 times the committee asked her to rework her paper. Now, you do have a mentor, and when I wrote mine, my mentor gave me some advice. No surprise, I didn't listen to it. But anyhow, they give you advice, they give you guidance. 13 times Reverend Sheena had to rewrite her paper. And she persevered, as we might say, she persisted. She persevered, and she was ordained. By the way, this was in 2013. 2013, that our state, Indiana and Kentucky, ordains the first African American woman. Yeah. So what I learned about being black and brave, I can only learn as an ally. I have to learn as an ally. When I go to the State House or Council to speak against discrimination or attend a Black Lives Matter event, I'm doing so as a white woman. I can feel the anger, the injustice. I can feel all that justified anger, but it's not personal to me. I had to learn that because one time, I believe it was on Twitter, I responded to something about that I was insulted by a discriminatory law, and thankfully someone came back at me. It's like, why are you insulted? And I explained it. They're like, it's not against you. It's not against you. I could be angry at it. I could call it discriminatory. I could do all those things, but as a black person, it wasn't personal. I can't be insulted on something against the black community, a black person. I had to wrestle with that, but I was also very grateful that someone checked me on that, as I said, that they just didn't let that go unnoticed. Now, currently at the Gary Public Library, I want to bring up a photography exhibit. It's called Unapologetically Noir by Tyrell Anderson. One of the questions he posed is, what does it mean to be black? And when you read the sayings, and there's also a book on it, when you read what they say, you see the accomplishments, you see their dreams, you see their strengths, you see what it means to be black. And it's not my experience, but I've questioned when you delved into it, when you read so much things, it's about courage, determination, it's about power, it's about your ancestors, it's about connecting. And I would encourage you to, because there's also the photos in black and white of the individual. So when you read what they're saying and you look at that photo and you begin to understand their experience, you begin to learn a little bit more. Another book that I've also learned so much from the Gary Anthology, which has from those who are living in Gary, and it has 30 essays and poems recounting their experiences of the area. Of course, racism and race does enter into many of these experiences, but it's a wide spectrum of ages, races, and cultures. And again, I've learned more about the experiences of people, not just what I thought about, not just what I knew, number-wise, but I learned about them. I've also learned that my interpretation is not always accurate. Okay, most of the time my first thoughts are not accurate, which sometimes does not stop me from saying them, if you will. And going back to this implicit bias, going back to Unapologetically Noir that I've referenced so many times, I'm the one referencing that maybe they struggled. I'm the one referencing discrimination. I'm the one referencing that. Very few of them mention it, and I'm not saying that because it didn't happen, but very few of them. Maybe that's my own stuff, as we say. Maybe I'm the one who's afraid of what's going to happen or afraid of what I'm going to do. You know, in closing, I want to talk about why I chose being black and being brave. Throughout that children's book, which I love, and I have to mention that I love sheep, and I take umbrage at those who think sheep are dumb. Okay, but when I look at that, no one says Charlotte's brave. The brave word is not even mentioned. It's what she did was considered brave. In much in the same way when we call people heroes, and when you interview them, they say, I don't consider myself a hero. I don't know if the people I mentioned, I don't know of all the citizens in Gary and the people, I don't know of all those who are black have maintained and persisted and opened businesses and achieved first and just be themselves. I don't know if they consider themselves brave. But the more I look, the more I learn about our history in that, I do consider it brave. I'll never know what it's like to stand and just be looked at implicit bias and discounted right away. I'll never know that. I can imagine what it's like. I can say, well, as a gay woman, I'm discriminated against. Well, you don't look at me and know that I'm gay. That bias starts immediately, that implicit bias. So what I've learned about being black and brave is that I need to keep learning. I need to keep looking at the experiences. I need to keep asking questions. And I am very thankful for the many who have shared their experiences about what it means to be black and brave. I'm very, very, very grateful for them. But I've learned that I would love to lift up and learn more, not just during Black History Month, but every day, to ask the questions, to see my own part in it. And just like Charlotte, I want to learn more. Just like Charlotte, I love to go to that mountaintop, if you will. I like to go spend that quiet time gazing at nature, gazing at the moon, and nobody has to know about it. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Now is the time in our service for our offering. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough. There's an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. You may also mail a check to the church. And we ask that you remember to contribute to the minister's discretionary fund this month. Now will you join me, please, in the closing hymn, number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. "34. closing words are from Brittany Jones from Unapologetically Noir. What does it mean to be Black? To be a member of a community of excellence, past and present. From pharaohs to artists to actors to scientists and in between. To trust that despite setbacks and sorrows, there exists a being who will never leave you, God.
Please join me now in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you for attending First Unitarian Church of Hobart today. Please join us now for our virtual coffee hour.